I'm going to read an excerpt from The Hill of Dreams by Arthur Machen. The excerpt I shall read is, to my mind, the best thing in the book, and it comes from somewhere near the beginning, when the boy Lucien climbs to the Roman fort, which is situated near the rectory in which he lives with his father. I think the whole novel really hinges on this episode. It is the whole point of the story. So I'll read this, to me, important excerpt. Within the fort, it was all dusky and cool and hollow. It was as if one stood at the bottom of a great cup. Within, the wall seemed higher than without, and the ring of oaks curved up like a dark green vault. There were nettles growing thick and rank in the fosse. They looked different from the common nettles in the lanes, and Lucien, letting his hand touch a leaf by accident, felt the sting burn like fire. Beyond the ditch there was an undergrowth, a dense thicket of trees. Stunted and old, crooked and withered by the winds into awkward and ugly forms. Beech and oak and hazel and ash and yew, twisted and so shortened and deformed that each seemed like the nettle of no common kind. He began to fight his way through the ugly growth, stumbling and getting hard knocks from the rebound of twisted boughs. His foot struck once or twice against something harder than wood, and looking down he saw stones, white with the leprosy of age, but still showing the work of the axe. And farther, the roots of the stunted trees gripped the foot-high relics of a wall, and a round heap of fallen stones nourished rank, unknown herbs that smelt poisonous. The earth was black and unctuous, and bubbling under the feet left no track behind. From it, in the darkest places where the shadow was thickest, swelled the growth of an abominable fungus, making the still air sick with its corrupt odour, and he shuddered as he felt the horrible thing pulped beneath his feet. Then there was a gleam of sunlight, and as he thrust the last boughs apart, he stumbled into the open space in the heart of the camp. It was a lawn of sweet, close turf in the centre of the matted brake, of clean, firm earth, from which no shameful growth sprouted. And near the middle of the glade was a stump of a felled yew tree, left untrimmed by the woodman. Lucien thought it must have been made for a seat. A crooked bough, through which a little sap still ran, was a support for the back, and he sat down and rested after his toil. It was not really so comfortable a seat as one of the school forms, but the satisfaction was to find anything at all that would serve for a chair. He sat there, still panting after the climb and his struggle through the dank and jungle-like thicket, and he felt as if he were growing hotter and hotter. The sting of the nettle was burning his hand, and the tingling fire seemed to spread all over his body. Suddenly, he knew that he was alone. Not merely solitary, that he had often been amongst the woods and deep in the lanes, but now it was a wholly different and a very strange sensation. He thought of the valley winding far below him, all its fields by the brook, green and peaceful and still, without path or track. Then he had climbed the abrupt surge of the hill, and passing the green and swelling battlements, the ring of oaks, and the matted thicket, had come to the central space. And behind there were, he knew, many desolate fields, wild as common, untrodden, unvisited. He was utterly alone. He still grew hotter as he sat on the stump and at last lay down at full length on the soft grass, and more at his ease felt the waves of heat pass over his body. And then he began to dream, to let his fancies stray over half-imagined delicious things, indulging a virgin mind in its wanderings. The hot air seemed to beat upon him impalpable waves, and the nettle's sting tingled and itched intolerably. And he was alone upon the fairy hill, within the great mounds, within the ring of oaks, deep in the heart of the matted thicket. Slowly and timidly he began to untie his boots, fumbling with the laces and glancing all the while on every side at the ugly, misshapen trees that hedged the lawn. Not a branch was straight, not one was free, but all were interlaced and grew one about another. And just above ground, where the cankered stems joined the protuberant roots, there were forms that imitated the human shape, and faces and twining limbs that amazed him. Green mosses were hair, and tresses were stark in grey lichen. A twisted root swelled into a limb. In the hollows of the rotted bark he saw the masks of men. His eyes were fixed and fascinated by the simulacra of the wood, and could not see his hands, and so at last, and suddenly it seemed, he lay in the sunlight, beautiful with his olive skin, hair darkened, dark-eyed, the gleaming bodily vision of a strayed fawn. Quick flames now quivered in the substance of his nerves, hints of mysteries, secrets of life passed trembling through his brain, Unknown desires stung him. As he gazed across the turf and into the thicket, the sunshine seemed really to become green, and the contrast between the bright glow poured on the lawn and the black shadow of the brake made an odd flickering light, in which all the grotesque postures of stem and root began to stir. The wood was alive. The turf beneath him heaved and sank as with the deep swell of the sea. He fell asleep and lay still on the grass in the midst of the thicket. He found out afterwards that he must have slept for nearly an hour. The shadows had changed when he awoke. His senses came to him with a sudden shock, and he sat up and stared at his bare limbs in stupid amazement. He huddled on his clothes and laced his boots, wondering what folly had beset him. Then, while he stood indecisive, hesitating, his brain a whirl of puzzled thought, his body trembling, his hands shaking, as with electric heat, sudden remembrance possessed him. A flaming blush shone red on his cheeks and glowed and thrilled through his limbs. As he awoke, a brief and slight breeze had stirred in a nook of the matted boughs, and there was a glinting that might have been the flash of sudden sunlight across shadow, and the branches rustled and murmured for a moment, perhaps at the wind's passage. He stretched out his hands and cried to his visitant to return. He entreated the dark eyes that had shone over him and the scarlet lips that had kissed him. And then panic fear rushed into his heart, and he ran blindly, dashing through the wood. He climbed the vellum and looked out, crouching, lest anybody should see him. Only the shadows were changed, and a breath of cooler air mounted from the brook. The fields were still and peaceful. The black figures moved far away amidst the corn, and the faint echo of the high-pitched voices sang thin and distant on the evening wind. Across the stream, in the cleft on the hill opposite to the fort, the blue wood smoke stole up a spiral pillar from the chimney of old Mrs. Gibbon's cottage. He began to run full tilt down the steep surge of the hill and never stopped till he was over the gate and in the lane again. As he looked back down the valley to the south and saw the violent ascent, the green swelling bulwarks and the dark ring of oaks, the sunlight seemed to play about the fort with an aureole of flame.